Hi, I'm glad you're here. This is Elder Insights, a little corner where we talk about life as it shifts, softens, and sometimes surprises us after 60. No pressure, no pretending, just real stories gently told. I never really planned to downsize. For years, that house felt like part of who I was. It held so much. Birthdays, burned dinners, long talks on the porch, quiet mornings with coffee and the newspaper folded just so. But things change. After my husband passed, and the kids settled into lives of their own, the house started to feel too full and too empty at the same time. Rooms we once danced in became places I just passed through. And one afternoon, standing in the garage with an old photograph in my hand, I felt something shift. Not dramatic, just quiet and certain. Maybe it's time, I thought. This is what happened next. What I let go of, what I held close, and what I never expected to find. If you're feeling a gentle nudge to create more space and peace in your life, like or share this video. It helps us keep making content that speaks to your journey. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Comment 1 if this story resonated, or 0 if you do things differently. We love hearing your voice. But honestly, things didn't start with the decision to downsize. Not really. They started with a quiet feeling that something had shifted, long before I even had the words for it. It didn't happen all at once. There was no grand epiphany, no aha moment like you see in the movies. It came slowly, like soft light filtering in through dusty curtains. A feeling I couldn't name at first. Just a sense that something no longer fit. At first, I ignored it. I busied myself with routines, watering the plants, folding the same linens I'd folded for decades, making tea in a kitchen that still smelled faintly of cinnamon and thyme. But then, little things began to speak louder. One day, I caught myself standing in the upstairs hallway, holding onto the banister, slightly out of breath. I hadn't noticed that climb feeling steeper, or that I no longer used half the rooms in the house. The guest room had become a place for unopened mail. The attic? I hadn't been up there since the year after my youngest moved out. Then there were the quiet evenings. I'd sit with the television on, more for company than for entertainment. I'd hear the walls creak and settle around me, like they too were aging. Sometimes I'd talk out loud, just to remember the sound of my own voice filling the space. But what truly shifted me wasn't anything dramatic. It was a call from my daughter, Emily. She asked me, gently, if I'd ever considered finding a smaller place. One that feels easier, she said. Not because you can't manage, just because you don't have to do it all anymore. At first, I bristled. I told her I was fine, strong, capable. But after we hung up, I sat there in the quiet, and I looked around, really looked. The heavy dining table with 6 chairs when I only ever used one. The china cabinet I hadn't opened in years. The upstairs closet still holding my husband's ties, still waiting. And then I thought of a moment, years ago, when I helped my own mother pack up her home. I remembered how she cried over a chipped porcelain bird and laughed at the dust bunnies hiding behind her record player. And how at the end of it all, she looked at me and said, "I didn't know I was carrying so much." That stayed with me. So one quiet Thursday, I took a small cardboard box from the pantry and I began. I started with one drawer, just one. I didn't call it downsizing, not yet. I just told myself I was making space. But deep down, I knew a new chapter was beginning. I quickly learned that letting go wasn't about boxes. It was about the memories tucked inside them. The first thing I tried to sort through was the hallway closet. It seemed simple enough, just coats, scarves, a few old umbrellas. But as I pulled out one sleeve after another, I froze. There it was, his old gray jacket, still faintly holding his scent, like time had curled up inside it and gone to sleep. I hadn't touched it in years, but I hadn't been able to let it go either. That's when it hit me. This wasn't going to be about space. It was going to be about memory. There was the drawer in the living room with all the birthday cards from the kids, crayon handwriting, glitter still clinging to some of them. The recipe box with my mother's handwriting, the one that said, "Don't forget extra nutmeg," in the corner of the pumpkin pie card. And the shoebox from the top shelf, full of seashells from a trip to Cape May we took in '82, back when the kids were small and my husband still reached for my hand just to hold it, not for balance. Some things were easy. Old extension cords, unmatched pillowcases, expired coupons, gone. But then there were the things that clung to me, the things that made me sit on the floor and just stare, like the tiny shoes my grandson had worn during his first visit. The Christmas ornament shaped like a book, gifted to me by a dear friend who's no longer here. A yellow drawing of a cat, proudly signed, "Mommy, it's us," in the corner, though it looked nothing like us, and everything like love. I didn't want to let them go, but I couldn't carry them all forward either. So I created a small ritual for myself. I lit a candle each evening, made a cup of tea, and gave myself 1 hour, just one. During that hour, I'd sit with each item and ask gently, "Do you belong in the life I'm living now, or the one I've already lived?" Some things I let go of with gratitude, some with tears, and a few I carried with me, not because I needed them, but because they asked to come along. Letting go wasn't about forgetting. It was about honoring what had been and choosing to walk forward without being buried by it. I didn't get it perfect. There are still boxes I couldn't open, and that's okay. This wasn't a race. It was a reckoning. And as I faced the things I couldn't part with just yet, I realized I wasn't doing this alone. The conversations that followed became part of the process. The first person I told was my daughter, Emily. I expected concern, maybe even resistance. But when I told her I was ready to let go of the house, she paused for a moment on the phone and then said softly, "I'm proud of you, Mom." That caught me off guard. She didn't ask, "Are you sure?" She didn't say, "But where will we go for Christmas?" She just let me be a woman making a choice for herself, not someone to be protected. Then came the harder conversations. One evening, I invited my son over for dinner, my famous baked chicken, just like old times. And after we cleared the plates, I told him I was parting with the dining set. His brow furrowed. "You're giving this away?" he asked, running his hand along the scratched tabletop. "This is the table I grew up at." "I know," I said, "but it's time for a smaller table, one that fits where I am now." He was quiet. Then he smiled a little and said, "Can I keep the chair with the wobbly leg?" We laughed. That moment, small, maybe forgettable to someone else, meant the world to me. It was his way of saying, "I see you. I understand." There were other moments too. A neighbor who'd lived down the street for 30 years brought me flowers when she heard the news. "I'll miss waving to you in the mornings," she said. And a dear friend of mine, widowed like me, whispered one afternoon, "You're braver than I am. I still sleep on one side of the bed, like he's coming back." Some conversations were lighthearted. My niece joked, "Auntie, Please don't give away your Tupperware collection. You've got vintage treasures in there." And I found myself chuckling at the absurdity of how many mismatched lids I'd kept. I still don't know where their partners went. But the most important conversation happened quietly one morning in the mirror. I looked at myself, really looked, and said, "You've lived so many lives in this one house. It's okay to want something different now." That gave me permission. Sometimes we need others to affirm our path. Other times we have to be the one to say, "Yes, this is mine. This is right." Then came moving day, a strange mix of stillness and motion, of looking back and stepping into the unknown. I woke up early, before the sun, before the noise, before anyone could say it was time. I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the boxes lined against the wall. It looked like someone else's life, packed up and waiting to go. I kept thinking, this doesn't feel real. Maybe I'll change my mind. But I didn't. When the moving truck pulled away, I stood alone in the driveway. The house behind me was quiet, almost reverent. I turned to face it one last time. The porch light flickered faintly, as if to say goodbye. I didn't cry then. I thought I would. But the tears didn't come until later, after I unlocked the door to my new place and stepped inside. It was small, smaller than anything I'd ever lived in. Just 2 bedrooms, a little balcony, and a kitchen that felt more like a corner than a room. But it was clean. Sunlight streamed in through the windows, warm and golden like a gentle welcome. And it smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. Still, it felt empty. I unpacked one box that evening, just the one with my kettle, a mug, and the blanket I always kept on the couch. I made tea again. This time, sitting on a floor that didn't creak when I moved. No history there yet, just possibility. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from sadness, really, but from the stillness, the kind that comes after a long exhale. I got up around 2 a.m., wrapped the blanket around my shoulders, and stood by the window. The city lights blinked softly in the distance. No ghosts here, no echoes, just me, breathing in a space that didn't ask for anything but my presence. I noticed something surprising in the days that followed. I moved slower, but lighter. Without a garden to tend, I found time to sit and read. Without stairs to climb, I had energy for afternoon walks. Without rooms I no longer used, I began to fill the ones I did with things that truly mattered. One morning, I brewed coffee and realized I had started humming to myself. I don't know when that returned. Maybe it had been missing longer than I thought. A home doesn't become home overnight. But this one, it listened. It didn't rush me. It just waited, quietly, until I was ready to open myself to it. And in that stillness, something opened in me too. I started noticing what had returned to me, not what I lost, but what I'd unknowingly made space for. I thought downsizing would feel like losing something, and in many ways, it did. I lost square footage. I lost closets. I lost the echo of footsteps that used to fill the hallway at Christmas, and the hum of the old fridge that had kept every birthday cake cool since the 80s. But slowly, quietly, I started gaining things I hadn't even known I was missing. I gained mornings, not rushed ones, but slow, sunlit mornings. I'd wake to birds outside the window, stretch without aching, and pad into the kitchen barefoot. The kettle whistled. I'd pour my tea and sit, just sit, without a to-do list gnawing at me. without the need to keep up with a home that no longer matched my pace. I gained space, not in the literal sense, but the kind that opens up when your days aren't crammed full of caretaking and fixing. With fewer things came fewer worries. I didn't have to wonder where that missing box was, or why the attic light wouldn't turn on, or how I'd manage to rake the leads before the first frost. I gained clarity. Without all the noise and clutter, I could hear myself think again. I began journaling, something I hadn't done since my 30s. I called old friends just to say hi. I started walking in the park nearby, and one Tuesday afternoon, I even signed up for a pottery class. Me, covered in clay and laughing like I hadn't in years. But maybe the most surprising thing I gained was a sense of becoming. For so long, I'd been wife, mother, daughter, neighbor, keeper of the house, all titles I held with love. But here in this smaller space, without all the roles staring back at me from every corner, I got to meet myself again. Not the younger me, not the past version, just me now. I thought I'd miss the big things most: the dining table, the garden, the tall windows in the front room. But it turns out, what I truly longed for was something much simpler. A home that fit, not just my furniture, but my spirit. And this one does. I still keep a box of memories tucked in the closet. Photos, cards, a seashell or two. But everything else, everything that once cluttered the walls or waited to be dusted, I gave it back to time. And in return, time gave me room to breathe. Looking back now, I don't regret the things I let go of. What I carried forward wasn't furniture or boxes. It was freedom and a deeper trust in who I am today. Downsizing didn't make my life smaller. It made it quieter, gentler, more mine. There are still moments, of course, days when I miss the sound of my husband's laugh in the old kitchen, or when I walk past a store and see the same curtains we once had hanging in the window. Memory is like that. It follows us, even when the boxes are gone. But now my home feels like a reflection, not a museum. It holds me rather than me holding it. And if you're standing in that in-between place right now, uncertain, a little tender, wondering if it's time, know this: you don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to be sure. You just have to listen for the quiet shift. And when it comes, trust that you're not moving backward. You're simply making space for what's next. If you're feeling a gentle nudge to create more space and peace in your life, like or share this video. It helps us keep making content that speaks to your journey. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Comment 1 if this story resonated, or 0 if you do things differently. We love hearing your voice.